At family dinner, my dad asked if my allowance was enough. When I said what allowance, his face went white. I thought he was joking. I laughed and said, "What allowance?" He did not laugh back. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. My mom stopped chewing. My sister stared at her plate. My dad looked at me slowly and said, "The money. The $2,000 a month your mom and I set aside for you since you moved out." My chest went cold. I told him I had never received anything, not once. The room fell apart after that. My mom tried to speak, but no sound came out. My sister suddenly stood up and said she needed to use the bathroom. My dad told her to sit back down. His voice was not loud, but it was terrifying. That was the moment I realized my entire adult life had been built on a lie. For years, I had been barely surviving. I worked 2 jobs. I skipped meals. I collapsed from exhaustion more than once. I told myself that was just what independence looked like. Meanwhile, my sister lived like a celebrity. Paris, Milan, luxury bags, 5-star hotels, endless shopping sprees. My mom always told me money was tight, that my sister just had better luck, that I should be grateful for being strong. The truth was so much uglier. My dad had been sending my mom $2,000 every single month for me. It was supposed to help me get on my feet, to support me while I worked and studied. My mom had been giving it all to my sister. For years, my sister cried, my mom cried, my dad demanded bank statements. When he saw them, he nearly broke. Thousands and thousands of dollars, all meant for me, all spent on my sister. My sister said Mom told her it was hers, that I was fine, that I did not need it. I had been working myself into the ground. That night changed everything. My dad cut my mom off financially. He took over every account. My sister lost everything overnight. My mom lost his trust. I finally got what was always meant for me, but the damage was already done. I was not just poor. I was betrayed, and no one ever fully recovered from it. After that night, everything changed. My sister retreated into her own world. She stopped answering my calls, stopped posting on social media for weeks, and seemed to vanish from the lives of anyone who had once admired her. I heard from mutual friends that she had been spiraling, crying constantly, snapping at everyone and blaming my mom for everything. My mom, on the other hand, became quieter. She didn't speak to me directly about what had happened. She avoided the subject entirely, pretending that life had gone back to normal, but I could feel the tension in every glance, every pause, every forced smile. I spent days trying to process the truth. $2,000 a month, meant for me, had been siphoned to my sister for years. The money that could have paid my rent comfortably, helped me eat properly, or allowed me a bit of a life while I was studying and working. It had been spent on luxury trips, fancy clothes, and indulgences that I would never even glimpse. I had been exhausted. I had been collapsing from overwork, and they had watched it happen. I started documenting everything in my mind. Every small injustice, every slight, every time my mom had said I should be grateful for being strong, every birthday gift I had never received, every time my sister had gotten a new phone or handbag while I went without. Then the day came when my sister finally contacted me. She didn't call. She didn't text. She came to my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, her eyes red, clutching a bag of belongings she had packed. I messed up, she said quietly. Mom lied. I didn't know. I thought it was for me, but it wasn't. I'm so sorry. I let her speak, letting her stumble over her words. It was the first time she had shown vulnerability in years. Her arrogance, her privilege, the smugness of the golden child. It was gone, replaced by fear, guilt, and shame. She told me how my mom had manipulated her, how she had been told repeatedly that I was doing fine on my own, that I didn't need anything, and that she should take the money to live her best life. She had been conditioned to believe she was entitled. She had been told she was helping the family. But now she knew the truth. I listened quietly. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The realization hit her hard enough. "You don't know how guilty I feel," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was doing what was right." I wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. How could I explain the years of struggle, The endless nights, the hunger, the exhaustion. How could I condense 5 years of silent suffering into a single conversation? I just nodded. That night, we cried together. I cried for the years I had lost. She cried for the life she had ruined, not intentionally, but irrevocably. And somewhere in that moment, I realized that pain could be shared, even if it could never be fully erased. The next morning, my mom called. She sounded calm, but there was an edge to her voice that made my blood run cold. "We need to talk about the family," she said. "We can fix this if we all cooperate." I knew what that meant. She wanted to spin the story, to manipulate the narrative, to regain control. But this time, I was no longer a passive player. I had seen the truth. I had felt it in every fiber of my being, and I was done being silent. I told her calmly that any further manipulation would not work. The accounts were now under my dad's direct supervision. I had what was rightfully mine, and I would not tolerate any attempts to rewrite history. She paused, likely surprised at my firm tone. "But we can make this work," she said, carefully choosing her words. "No," I said simply. "We cannot go back. We can move forward, but only if honesty is maintained. No more lies, no more favoritism, no more stealing from me." It was the first time I had ever spoken to her like that, the first time I had ever put myself first. And the relief I felt was intoxicating. Meanwhile, my sister began to rebuild. She had lost her privileges, her luxurious lifestyle, and the world she had known, but she also began to see reality. She started working for herself, understanding what it meant to earn and struggle and take responsibility. She began sending me small payments of apology, symbolic gestures, but gestures nonetheless. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast. But for the first time in years, I felt some balance returning to my life. And while my mom continued to try small manipulations, they no longer held power over me. I had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, could never be blindly restored. Months passed after the initial confrontation. My sister had begun to rebuild her life, but the shadow of what had happened followed her like a dark cloud. She was no longer the untouchable golden child. People in our extended family had started noticing changes in her behavior. She was more anxious, more defensive, more fragile. The first time the truth reached the public eye was during a distant cousin's wedding. My sister had insisted on attending despite everything, trying to appear normal, to act like nothing had happened. But appearances are hard to maintain when everyone already knows something is off. During the reception, I overheard whispers. People were talking about the Allowance scandal, about how the golden child had lived in luxury at the expense of her older sibling. My sister's face went pale when she realized people were noticing, and for the first time she felt the weight of her actions. Her friends tried to console her, but I saw her flinch at every glance. She was being judged, quietly, subtly, but unmistakably. It wasn't malicious, it was the truth. The truth had a way of making people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, my mom tried desperately to control the narrative. She called my relatives, telling them the money had been meant for my sister, that I had been fine on my own, that everything had been a misunderstanding. But the facts were stubborn. The bank statements, the timeline, the witnesses, all of it painted a clear picture. People started to realize that my sister had benefited from deception. Some friends felt sympathy for her, but many felt betrayed. And slowly, quietly, she began to lose her social influence, the aura of perfection she had carried for years. At first, I felt a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. I didn't want to see her suffer, but the scales had finally begun to balance. I had spent years being invisible, overlooked, and ignored. And now, for the first time, the consequences of greed and favoritism were apparent. The public fallout wasn't immediate, but it was steady. Invitations to events stopped coming. People began to talk candidly in private about fairness, about privilege, about entitlement. My sister had to confront a reality she had never known. Life isn't always forgiving to those who take advantage of others. My mom's attempts to manipulate others backfired spectacularly. Friends who once blindly supported her reasoning started questioning her decisions. They asked pointed questions about why I had been ignored, why my struggles had been overlooked, and why my sister had received luxury at my expense. My mom had no answers. Her carefully crafted stories crumbled under scrutiny. Meanwhile, I continued to focus on myself. I maintained my work, my studies, my financial stability. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply living. Watching the consequences unfold naturally without my interference was more satisfying than any confrontation I could have staged. My sister reached out to me again during this period. She was desperate, apologetic, and unsure. "I never wanted this to happen," she said in a voice filled with tears. "I didn't understand. I didn't know. I want to make it right." I listened, but I didn't rush to forgive her. Trust takes time to rebuild, and she had learned that lesson the hard way. She started making small gestures to show accountability. She began saving her own money, working for what she wanted, and stepping into a reality she had been shielded from her entire life. Even so, every family event became a tense reminder of the past. My mom tried to pretend everything was normal. My sister attempted to maintain appearances. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and slowly, quietly, the family began to see her differently. The golden child had fallen, and the invisible child had finally been recognized. After the wedding incident, life at home became tense. Every family gathering carried the weight of unspoken truths. My sister no longer walked into rooms with the same confidence she once did. She hesitated before speaking, watching every reaction, unsure if her words would be judged or twisted. She had begun to understand the consequences of her actions and the reality of the years she had benefited at my expense. My mom, however, refused to admit fault. She continued to try to manipulate conversations, to spin stories, to protect her favorite child. Whenever my sister faltered, she would whisper reminders of how much you've been through, trying to justify her previous choices. She tried to pit us against each other, hoping I would forgive, hoping the sister would bend, hoping the family image would remain intact. I saw it clearly this time. I refused to let her control me. I refused to be gaslighted or silenced. I had spent too many years in shadows, too many nights exhausted and unnoticed. I wasn't about to let her rewrite history. My sister, on the other hand, had begun to confront herself. She started looking for part-time work, saving money, and living without the financial crutches she had relied on for years. She would call me sometimes, hesitant and quiet, asking questions about money management or about how I had survived independently for so long. She was learning the hard way, and she was slowly growing into her own person outside of my mother's manipulations. I started noticing small changes in her attitude. She apologized more sincerely, without expecting immediate forgiveness. She admitted to friends and distant relatives that she had benefited unfairly. She tried to make amends where she could, though she knew some damage was permanent. Despite this, tension remained. My mom's attempts to control the narrative didn't stop. She would make subtle comments during gatherings, try to elicit sympathy from my sister, or subtly shame me for bringing up the past. But I had learned to disengage. I focused on my life, on my work, on my own financial independence. I realized the only way to protect myself was to remain steady, calm, and unshaken by their attempts. The family slowly began to adapt to this new reality. Friends and distant relatives started seeing the dynamics for what they were. The golden child illusion shattered, and my sister's public image began to align more closely with reality. People started respecting her honesty in admitting her mistakes. My mom's credibility, however, declined steadily. It became harder for her to justify her actions, especially as people learned about the money transfers and the deliberate favoritism. One night, my sister came over to my apartment. She looked different, more composed, more self-aware. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, her voice low but steady. I can't change the past, but I want to start making better choices. I don't want to be that person anymore." I didn't respond immediately. I watched her, seeing someone who had been forced into reality after years of privilege. I realized that she had finally begun to understand what it meant to face consequences, to take responsibility, and to rebuild trust. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival, growth, and learning to navigate a world without manipulation or unfair advantages. Over the next few months, my sister continued to rebuild her life. She struggled, stumbled, and occasionally slipped back into old habits, but she kept moving forward. She worked harder than I had ever seen her work before, and slowly, she began to find her own independence. My mom, on the other hand, remained trapped in denial. She continued to attempt small manipulations, but they no longer held power over me. I had learned to recognize her tactics and to protect myself from them. She had underestimated the strength I had built over years of struggle and hardship. And while some family members remained loyal to her, more and more began to see the truth. Favoritism and deception have consequences, and ignoring the needs of one child for the benefit of another is not something that can be hidden forever. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace. I had been recognized, validated, and supported. I had survived betrayal, exhaustion, and manipulation, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of my worth than I had ever been before. Time moved slowly, yet relentlessly. Months had passed since the allowance scandal first came to light. My sister had been forced to confront herself, my mom had been forced to confront her manipulation, and I had been forced to confront the years of invisibility and exhaustion I had endured. The first family gathering after everything felt like walking into a battlefield. But I was no longer afraid. I had reclaimed my strength, my voice, and my boundaries. I arrived calm, measured, and unshakable. My sister entered quietly, not with arrogance, not with entitlement, but with humility. She smiled nervously at me and my dad. She greeted distant relatives with soft politeness. Her confidence had been tempered by experience, her entitlement replaced by accountability. My mom arrived last, trying to maintain composure. She spoke carefully, choosing her words as if testing each one. But I was no longer susceptible to her manipulation. I listened without reacting, observing instead, seeing the patterns of her behavior laid bare. At dinner, conversation flowed cautiously. My sister made small, deliberate efforts to connect, apologizing where necessary, acknowledging her mistakes, and expressing genuine gratitude for the lessons she had learned. I watched her. I saw her struggle to navigate her new reality. I saw her attempt to make amends, not because she was forced, but because she wanted to. And in that, I found a strange sense of hope. My mom tried to interject, to steer the conversation, to manipulate perceptions. But she found resistance instead of compliance. My father supported me silently, his presence a reminder that fairness and accountability still mattered. Later, when everyone had retired to their rooms, my sister and I spoke privately. She told me about the guilt that had plagued her, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the fear of being exposed again. She spoke candidly, openly, and with vulnerability. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I didn't understand, and I didn't see. I was selfish, and I let Mom manipulate me. But I want to do better. I want to make this right." I nodded. "I know," I said. "It's a start. You can't undo the past, but you can change the future." We talked long into the night. We shared memories, regrets, and plans for rebuilding trust. She admitted she had been spoiled, pampered, and allowed to live without consequences. She had finally understood what it meant to struggle, to earn, and to respect the efforts of others. Over the next several months, our family dynamics shifted slowly but significantly. My sister continued her personal growth, taking responsibility for her actions, seeking independence, and learning to navigate life with honesty. My mom, still stubborn in her ways, gradually recognized that her manipulation no longer held sway. I maintained boundaries, refusing to be drawn into old patterns, and she began to adjust, begrudgingly, cautiously. And me? I finally felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I had survived betrayal, neglect, and favoritism. I had endured exhaustion, financial struggle, and invisibility. And now, I had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more confident in my worth. The golden child had fallen, not by malice, but by the natural consequences of her choices. The manipulations had been revealed, the truth laid bare, and accountability enforced. At the end of the day, I realized the most important lessons were not about money or favoritism or past injustices. They were about resilience, integrity, and self-respect. They were about standing up for yourself, claiming what is rightfully yours, and refusing to be invisible any longer. Life moved forward, imperfect but honest. My sister worked hard to build a life of her own. My mom learned that manipulation could not protect anyone. And I finally could breathe freely, knowing that I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my place in the family. The dinner table that once symbolized oppression and invisibility had been replaced by a table of accountability, growth, and slowly mended relationships. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged, truly, fully, and without compromise.